ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome the moderator of one of the last sessions of GLOBSEC 2021, Emily Tamkin.
Hello, everyone. Last afternoon here at GLOBSEC, we are in the home stretch, and thank you for being with us. We know that there are other events going on. We appreciate you being here. This is only a 50-minute panel, which is not very much time to discuss great power competition in East Asia, the subject of this discussion. So we are going to keep it conversational, lively, and it's meant to be a discussion. So please do join in. There will be an opportunity to ask questions either here in this room. We have Zoom questions, and there is, you can obviously submit them through the GLOBSEC app. To start out, I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists. They need no introduction, but that's my job, so here we go. There is Yasuhiro Nakamaya. He is the State Minister of Defense joining us from Japan. We have Bruno Misic here in person. He is a Senior Research Associate at the Wilfrid Martin Center for European Studies. From my city, DC, we have Tori Tassig. She is a non-resident fellow at Brookings. And then we have here Kinga Brudzinska, a Policy Director at the Center for Global Europe at GLOBSEC. Thank you all so much for being with me today. Bruno, I want to start with you. So I will. Before we get into this discussion, which assumes that there is great power competition, I've had some discussions with people outside of the United States who say there is no great power competition. This is a framing invented by the Americans to justify opposition to China, to keep themselves relevant in the world, et cetera. What do you make of that?
Well, you could make that argument. I think the idea of great power competition is very popular outside the US, actually. It's very popular in Moscow, for example. It seems to refer to the idea that there are different poles of power. In fact, when I listen to President Biden these days, it seems to me that he's abandoning a bit the notion of great power competition. He's going back to an older notion of a global liberal order. And the power is rooted in the global liberal order. The United States stands as a kind of enforcer of that order. But when we talked about great power competition in the latest administration and the strategy papers that came out, the notion was that the global liberal order had eroded and we were a bit back in the jungle with different poles of power and a certain uncertainty about the number of those powers. We knew that China, the United States, but then the questions whether the European Union was part of it, questions whether India could rise to that position, and questions about whether Russia had a role to play in this great power competition. But clearly, to me, the idea of great power competition means that each of these poles has its own ideological model. Each of these poles has its own center of power, is self-sufficient in some sense. And so the question is this really the case, or should we still think that something like a global order still exists and still provides stability? And for some people, it was just Trump that didn't believe in the global liberal order, but it's still solid. And for others, that order no longer makes sense. It's impossible to enforce. How do we enforce something against China? And I guess that's the question that the Biden administration will have to answer. How do we enforce something against Russia? How do we enforce something against China? Right now, we see that there's powers of enforcement being quite weak.
Well, this is actually related to our poll question, which is what percentage of Central and Eastern Europeans is worried about China's rising economic power? So if you have the GLOBSEC app, you can respond to this poll, and we will read out the answers at the end. I want to go now to Minister Nakayama. Firstly, I apologize for mispronouncing your last name in the opening remarks. Second of all, could you, this is about great power competition in East Asia. You are the only participant who is in East Asia. Can you give us the view from Japan?
Okay, thank you very much. My Japanese name is so complicated always, so this is not your fault. Thank you anyway. So nice meeting you. I'm from Japan, and I am living just right in front of China. And I know that they are communist, the ruling party is a communist party. And, in 1997, as you can see, what's going on at the Hong Kong issue, or the human rights in Uyghur, or the another issue about the, AI, AI is is actually that there is two meanings for China. One, AI is an artificial island. The other, AI is artificial intelligence. So the lots of dimensions what we have to discuss about. But unfortunately, the China held the National People's Congress in March and announced that its defense budget for fiscal year 2021 was approximately US dollar 202 billion, represented growth of approximately 6.8% compared to the previous fiscal year. So the China, even after Corona, they are increasing the budget for the military. And and especially we are really concerned about China between Taiwan. There's the Taiwan Strait. We have a concern about the day before yesterday, the Chinese Air Force invaded to the Taiwanese territorial, the sky above Taiwan. So those kind of very naughty activity by Chinese PLA towards Taiwan, it's now increasing the numbers of the time. So, and also when you focus to the East China Sea and South China Sea, I brought like this photograph from the satellite. This artificial island used to be just a leaf, very good. It's a very natural reef, but within 2-3 years, we made a very, very long runway with a military base. So you can see more close to 4 kilometers runway in this artificial island. So the lots of European countries coming towards the South China Sea right now, and also the U.S. military forces concerned about the area we are talking about. And today I'm really glad that joining this forum, but this forum actually held in Europe. And now the people who talking about this issue is came from the United States, which we our allies. And I'd like to say and mention that the globe is a round, and the internet also, there is no border in this century. So we have to talk not just the transatlantic relationship, but we also have to talk about the Asia issue, because this Taiwan Strait issue is going to be related to the whole nations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. A lot to unpack there that we're going to come back to throughout this discussion. But right now I want to talk about, Minister, you mentioned this military conflict, but there's also a political conflict, right? What kind of governance systems are we going to live under? Troy, you wrote a piece just recently that basically said that countries that are standing up to China, and I apologize if I'm summarizing it incorrectly, you can push back, but basically the countries that are standing up to China can do so democratically, right? Can bolster the democratic institutions, and that this will be an effective way to counter China. But in the United States, whether or not you protect voting rights has become a partisan issue. There are examples throughout Europe of democratic backsliding or whatever phrase you want to use to describe it. So my question is, how can these countries that are democratic and are standing up to China, how can they say they're doing that for democracy when democracy is not being taken care of at home?
Big question. First, Emily, thank you for introducing this panel. It's nice to be with everyone here today, albeit virtually. Emily, I think your framing is right. So if we take a step back and look at how the Biden administration is crafting its early worldview. I would say to start, it was interesting to me that in the interim national security guidance, there actually was no reference to great power competition. I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is because Russia and China are not seen on the same level of strategic competition. I think that makes sense. But more broadly, the framing for this administration's foreign policy agenda is in a global competition between authoritarian and democratic states. China is clearly a central feature of that. But another central feature of that is that the United States seeks to rally the world's democracies to take on significant transnational challenges, whether that be China, climate change, recovering from the global pandemic. And I think that's what we saw the president do on this international trip to Europe, which is just wrapping up. He wants to show that America is back, but that it is capable of rallying the world's democracies. So yes, you bring up a key tension that some of the world's strongest industrial democracies are backsliding internally on a number of metrics. I think the administration recognizes that and seeks to strengthen our internal foundations, whether that be on voting rights, but also just presenting a strong democratic model for the world. And this is going to be a big challenge for the US, Europe, European and Asian democracies to present a strong internal model so that we can take on critical transnational challenges together. To close, I think you bring up an important tension, but it is one that is acknowledged in this administration's approach to its European and its Asian democratic partners.
Thank you so much. Kinga, I'd like to bring you in here. You also recently have a report out. Could you tell us a bit about that and what your conclusions are about the current state of great power competition?
Thank you very much, Emily, and welcome everyone. I wanted to build up, and actually I think Bruno and Torres' remarks about building a democratic alternative has also nicely sums up, or it was also discussed during the G7 summit recently, where President Biden also mentioned that there needs to be a new initiative. And we also heard in the past about the D10 summit that is in the making, and we will see what happens. I think the important of course, the competition is going on, but despite and regardless the new initiatives, the most important part of it is that they deliver and they bring tangible results. Because we've seen many initiatives. There's a community of democracies. There are different institutions that their mission is to support democracies abroad, but if they don't deliver, then the effects might be actually bring some negative effects. There was also an initiative of building back a better world that was announced as well, and this.
Some people like the slogan so much they adopted it for themselves.
Exactly. So we will see, but it's a great time. It's a good momentum, and it's good to see that America is back as well. And I think both America and Europe needs each other to work on issues, even though they don't agree on everything on global powers such as China.
I have a follow-up, which is, you just said America is back. Biden himself has repeatedly said America is back, but we still have a highly polarized country. We have midterms in 2022, the presidential election in 2024. Is there a sense in Europe, particularly in this part of Europe, that, okay, Biden's back, he's saying the right things, but it could be reversed like that, and in the meantime, we've gotten increasingly adversarial toward Russia and to China?
Yeah, I think you are right. There is a feeling that America is back, but there is also understanding that this is not the same America that we used to see, but especially if we are talking about this region has never been left America from its orbit. For example, you mentioned our report. We just published a report on strategic autonomy from Central and Eastern European view or perspectives. It's not a report that has country chapters, but rather we brought together authors from the region to discuss the topic. And this topic was strategic autonomy discussions in Europe has started way before the COVID pandemic. But all the authors, for example, say that regardless we want or not, the strategic autonomy of some sorts will be with us in the medium or long term. But of course, the devil lies in the details. And also what every single author of this report said, that yes, Central Europe will not oppose it, but it must not lead into decoupling, and the transatlantic bond is something that is important for this region, and this is the whole premise.
Bruno, a question for you. You know, with great power competition, it's easy to see what this means. Well, maybe not easy, but it's clearer or easier to see what this means for the United States, for Russia, for China, for Japan, for India. Is there concern that for smaller countries, say in Europe, or around the world, that they get left behind and lost in the shuffle of between the great powers?
It's a big concern for lots of medium-sized powers. I get that question all the time. Can a country afford not to choose? You know, Singapore would probably not like to be forced to choose necessarily in all dimensions between China and the United States, as strong economic links. There are other countries who are forced in a way to pick a side, and that was the story in the Cold War. I'm not sure it's going to be the story here. I see opportunities for countries to play both sides, and some are trying that. When it comes to Europe,
name names.
Well, you know, some very successful countries have developed close ties with China, even in Europe. Switzerland is a good case. Switzerland has a free trade agreement with China, and they seem to be happy with it. They don't have the same, you know, they have a history of neutrality that allows them not to be necessarily forced to align with the United States on everything. They can say no. Now, the question is this going to be in the end successful or not? Or in the end, they're going to be forced to choose? When it comes to Europe, I remember meeting Minister Nakayama in 2015, and he was always insisting, I think also with other European counterparts, that Europe has to wake up. And the question which he referred to today as well is, you know, the economic links, particularly between East Asia and Europe, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, are they going to be controlled by China in the end? Are those trade routes going to be controlled by China? The ports, the massive ports that are being constructed, freedom of navigation. This is an issue where Europe has to be very, very active. We cannot afford to become a fortress isolated from the world. So the idea that, in a way, we have to be present in Asia is becoming recognized in Brussels. You have some European countries developing Indo-Pacific strategies. You have the European Commission having 2 years ago a big summit with the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Ideas to do the same with India. So I think Minister Nakayama was right back then in 2015. This is an issue also for Europe. We have to be present in Asia.
Well, so I'd like to go now to Minister Nakayama and ask, do you think that Europe and the rest of the world have woken up? If so, when did they wake up and why? And if not, kind of what is it going to take?
So what the Japan hopes now to maintain and reinforce the vision of FOIP is to further develop our relationship with European Union as a strategic partner that we can act together with to establish world peace and security and stability based on common values such as democracy and rule of law and principles. And, you know, we can make a promise, and but some country sometimes break the rules. So we are democratic countries have to unite, and we need add more friends to make a strengthening have to against give the bad influence to their neighboring country, or even not neighboring country, because now the time you can attack even not geopolitically close. You can attack another country through the internet or cyber attacks. So our friends and the needs is all over the world. So Bruno said we have to wake up, means we have to wake up now. And when 2015 I was State Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I attended all the cybersecurity conference held at the Europe, held at the North America, and I felt at that time already, I feel that the new Cold War exists in the cyberspace. So that means Russia and China already collaborating on the cyber world. And United States and Japan is collaborating. And the internet field for Chinese and Russians, I think that they want to control everything. But for the United States and Japan, country like Japan, we want to use internet field to emphasize the economy, to make more strong and free economy. So I hope the new president of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden, become strong, to make a strong leadership to the democratic nations, and to call upon the everybody get together to protect the democratic world, and not just the chasing between the communist country, but also we have to bring them into the stage that we can talk more freely and also talk more honestly. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one last question that I'm going to put to Tori before opening it up to audience questions. Again, we have Zoom questions you can ask via the app. And if you're here with me in this room, we have a microphone that you can get up to and ask. We just ask that you please not touch the mic, as we are still in a global pandemic. Tori, my question for you, so we have this great power competition, right? We're in this adversarial relationship. On the other hand, we have issues like the global pandemic, like climate change, that we kind of can't address if we aren't cooperating to some extent. So how do we balance the two, right? The reality that there are these, aggressive, autocratic countries that are on the ascent, and on the other hand, that there are existential challenges that we need to work out.
Right, it's a great point, and I'll answer that by picking up on a thread that Bruno raised, which is in the United States asking allies or partners to choose between the United States and China. It brings up this idea of decoupling that I think was prominent during the Trump administration. But I'd like to debunk both of those terms before moving on to your question. One, I don't think that the United States under the Biden administration, nor even under the Trump administration, really was looking at decoupling between the West and China, the United States and China, as a viable policy option. It is clear that we operate in an interconnected web of technologies and economies, and that is not possible in today's world. The second idea of asking allies and partners to choose, I also do not think is on the table in the Biden administration's foreign policy agenda either, because the United States recognizes that many of its allies and partners in Europe and in Asia rely fundamentally on China's economy, and that if we asked allies and partners to choose, we may not like the answer. So I think there is more complexity to U.S. foreign policy now than to put it in terms of decoupling and asking allies and partners to choose. So I think that that's an important thread to start from. But another reason that these are not viable options is, Emily, because as you mentioned, we're dealing with transnational challenges that will require cooperation between democratic and authoritarian partners. And I think that we can look at the US-Russia summit that just concluded to show that this is possible and that it is necessary. You know, we look at nuclear issues, for example, being a transnational challenge that we have to deal with. The United States and Russia, I would say, are on a pretty adversarial footing at the moment, yet Presidents Biden and Putin recognize that as the two world's largest nuclear powers, we need to have a sense of stability in this relationship to ensure that peace remains. That's one. You know, we also have our, you know, looking at the relationship with China, it's very clear that we are going to need to cooperate with China on big issues like climate change, but also on pandemic recovery, addressing the next pandemic, should there ever be one, and that we need to keep channels of dialogue and communication and engagement open so that we can deal with these big transnational challenges, like I mentioned, nuclear issues, climate change, pandemics. This is going to require cooperation and dialogue with authoritarian states, with peer competitors, with adversaries. And I think that that's very much woven into the fabric and understanding of this administration's outlook right now.
Okay, so we have about half the session left. We're going to go to questions now. We have one from the app, which reads, it's anonymous. It reads, is military still the main area of competition between great powers such as China and the US, or are geoeconomics and technology more important in that regard? Kinga, because you just have this report on strategic autonomy come out, I would like you to take a stab.
Thank you very much, Emily. Yeah, I think it's definitely the second one. And we were also discussing, and this is also, I will refer maybe to the argument that if Europe wakes up or not when it comes to the global competition, but I think it definitely does. Of course, there is a division between those who think that Europe is, you know, too slow, does not do enough. But on the other hand, I started just to write down, you know, what EU did in this regard, and it's not enough. We all know that member states' national interests are divided. There's no common position on China, Russia, but there are attempts from this bureaucratic machine in Brussels. We have a geopolitical commission, even it probably sets expectations too high to what it can deliver, but there is a global thinking about it. We have also the new agenda for multilateralism, when the EU states that it will that this pragmatic approach and cooperation and approach to China. This is something that the EU is also looking for, and member states are actually reading for more interest-driven EU. And also, member states are working on the strategic compass also to bring the positions closer, or analyze together different threats. So I definitely think that Europe has woke up to the geopolitical challenges and is seeking for its role on the global stage. Yeah, it's just the time when the EU will arrive there.
Mm-hmm. I know we have a Zoom question, so if the producers could bring us that query. They're not ready yet with the Zoom question, but that's fine. Okay, does anyone in the room have a question? Okay, we have another one from the app, which is, it's a two-parter from Dimitar Lilkov of the Martin Center. One, will the Quad Alliance, US, Australia, India, Japan, become more prominent in the future? And then the second part is Japan's view. Does the EU recognize the importance of Southeast Asia? So I'm going to have Tori take the first one, and then we'll go to the minister. So Tori, will the Quad Alliance become more important in the future, do you think?
Short answer, yes. I think we're already seeing the Quad play a pretty prominent role in the U.S. approach to the Indo-Pacific currently. The fact that we had the first leaders meeting of the Quad early on in the Biden administration, I think is important. I think it will become an organizing principle for dealing with challenges from China in the region, but also a more positive and affirmative vision dealing with vaccine distribution. There is I think, a working group for critical and emerging technologies that is taking place within the Quad format. And yes, absolutely, I think that this will be an important organizing principle for U.S. engagement in the region. I would be curious to hear from our Japanese counterparts whether he sees a concrete, real role for the EU within, or European partners within the Quad, but on that I defer to my colleague.
So let's go now to Minister Nakayama. Do you think that, well, first of all, does the EU recognize the importance of Southeast Asia? And is there a role for the EU in the Quad? Or with
I think I'm so sure that for example, this April this year, European Union too has announced its strategy to cooperate in the Indo-Pacific, and also what this strategy advocates is exactly in harmony with what Japan promotes in the FOIP vision. In particular, as defense minister, I highly commend on the point that the EU strategy sets out the strengthening of presence and action in the Indo-Pacific. On a related note, we are seeing a closer collaboration with each of the European nations. Last month, we conducted a multilateral exercise called ARC-21 with France and United States and Australia. That involved training menus such as replenishment at sea, RAS, and landing ashore. Not only were we able to demonstrate our resolution to protect our remote islands, but we were also able to show off our solid collaboration between Japan and France and the Indo-Pacific to our domestic and international audience. Moreover, as an effort not to lose the momentum of the exercise, each of the chief of staff from ground, maritime, and air staff offices engaged in VTCs with their France counterparts and share views regarding defense cooperation going forward. And also the United Kingdom is going to send Queen Elizabeth. And so I think, and also the Germany too. So all the European Union countries really focusing on this region, Northeast Asia, and also the Southeast Asia. But unfortunately, honestly speaking, the Taiwan issue is, I think, the most biggest issue. And in the Pacific Ocean, we have a Honolulu, and there is a Indo-PACOM of the United States, 7th Fleet base. I think the Pacific Ocean is very big value and asset for not just the Asian country, but also the Indian Ocean countries and even the Europeans. If you look at this map, this is South China Sea. And if the Chinese submarine launch the longest distance missile towards the North America, it already reaches to the White House. And that means whole the nation, including Europe, is already inside of the range of the Chinese nuclear weapons. It's a possibility. But we have to unite, and this issue and the concern, we have to talk about like this situation. And I don't know about the Quad future, but Quad, it's kind of like examples of how we make a good friend, which we have a mutual profit for the future, and it will. So thank you very much.
Bruno, I'd like to put the same questions to you, but from the European perspective. So do you think that the EU recognizes the importance of Southeast Asia, and what is the role for Europe with the Quad?
Yes, it does. The High Representative just came back from Indonesia. There was actually a very good reaction, lots of op-eds in the Straits Times and other regional newspapers. The idea, again, is we have very strong trade links and economic links, but that's not quite enough. They have to be protected politically and perhaps even militarily. The issue, you asked this question earlier, just a side note, so far the competition has been mostly economic and technological, but there's of course a question whether Chinese authorities decide to change the nature of this competition at some point. By the way, finding that competition in the economic sphere is becoming very difficult. And therefore, then the question of Taiwan and other questions could be raised. It's possible that China would divert great power competition to the military sphere at some point. That could be the story for the next decade. And there, I remain very skeptical that the European Union can do a lot. The question, as it's usually posed in Brussels and Washington, is, should Europe have a military presence in Southeast Asia and South Asia, or should it focus on Europe, therefore freeing American resources to be more focused on Asia? I think that's a dialogue that's happening between the United States and Europe. Probably what's going to happen, maybe Minister Nakayama will disagree, but probably what's going to happen is that Europe is going to be more focused on its eastern borders. European resources are going to be used to face Russia, and that the US will slowly divert its attention to South Asia, Southeast Asia, Philippines. Let me just finish with one thought. Maybe you won't come back to me. It's been interesting, this discussion, the question of values, because when you talk about great power competition, and during the Trump administration, it seemed to be the sort of leaving behind the values question and focusing on power. And that's very much a question that is alive. So far, the Biden administration has really concentrated its attention on democracies. India, Japan, South Korea have deserved prime treatment from the administration. But soon enough, we're going to have a very serious question whether the United States is going to engage with Vietnam, is going to engage with the Philippines. In particular, of course, lots of questions about Duterte there, Thailand. And then that raises the question of whether values should be the main consideration or power should be the main consideration. And I personally think that the United States will be forced sooner or later to be a bit more flexible in its approach if it wants to balance Chinese power in Asia.
So we have another question. This one comes to us from Jack Dalrymple. How successful do you think China's Belt and Road Initiative has been, and what do you think should be Europe's response to these efforts to influence countries? Kinga, I will go to you.
Yeah, I think we've just seen the response and the G7 summit conclusions or recommendations that the world is thinking about this question, and there is actually a real understanding that those alternatives must be delivered if the world, if democracies want to shape and influence the world as well. So I think Chinese were very smart in this approach with this initiative, and from their perspective, it is successful. It's often also that this region is criticized for the 16 now 1+1 summit, and it comes up in our report, but also discussions that we have in the region as well, is that the Central and Eastern European countries are more and more kind of disappointed with the Chinese approach, and we often say it's not 16+1 but 1+16 because the states are aware and they cannot influence that much the agenda, the format, the setup. So it has been highly criticized, but there is also a reflection in the region that this is not the format that, for example, brings that much to the region, and we've seen Lithuania living it. So we will see what happens and how also this is integrated on the EU level, but we also know that other member states also have their different policies. So I would end here.
Okay. We have another anonymous question. This says, economy, resources, and technology concern strategic autonomy. How to keep the autonomy economically? Tori, I'd like to go back to you because you spoke earlier about how we're not really going to decouple economically. What are your thoughts on this question? How do you remain economically autonomous in a great power world?
Big question. And there are a couple of things I'd like to pick up on from what Bruno and Kinga have said as well. But to address this issue, I think the best way for European powers and for the European Union to engage in what we might call a great game of great power competition, however you want to phrase it, is through its economic weight and its regulatory power. We haven't really brought up this idea of regulatory power yet. And this is where the European Union and the European market have a tremendous amount of weight on the world stage and can influence how companies and powers engage at home in the world's largest market. So I think looking ahead, we're going to see the European Commission really lean into that, its economic and its regulatory power to engage among great powers like the United States, Russia, and China. So that's one point. I want to go back to the question on BRI and development, because I completely agree with Kinga that I think there's a lot of disappointment and disillusionment with what China is offering to both industrialized and developing countries in its very loan-heavy model, and also just in the disappointment around what China's been able to follow through on infrastructure-wise. And so I think the time is right for industrialized democracies, the United States, Europe, other countries in the Indo-Pacific like Japan, to really present viable alternatives to China's BRI. And honestly, I don't think we're there yet. I think the European Asian connectivity strategy, the United States Blue Dot Network, and development initiatives like this they don't have the political weight and the economic investment behind them to currently present viable alternatives. And I really think we need to lean into the development angle of our soft power influence around the world. So I think development is going to be critical to our ability to compete economically with key regions around the world now and going forward.
Great. So we have another question. This one comes from A. Tathova. It's a question for Minister Nakayama. Where do you see the future of EU-Japan cooperation? What are the areas where it could be strengthened? Minister.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I'd like to say that, for example, think about the Chinese activities right now. We are really concerned about unilateral attempts to change the status quo. And, but these kind of things, not just happening on the earth, but also the outer space. So, for example, like in the military field, the big countries and the countries who get lots of budget for the armament, they already created HGV missiles, which is a very high-speed, long-range missiles. And we cannot stop those kind of high-speed, very aggressive, massive attacks. And if we want to stop those high technologies, we have to create and we have to prepare the protection of the outer space. But if you look up the sky and see the outer space, we have lots of already problems and issues. And you can see the lots of types of their space, and that the Chinese the space agency already launched lots of killer satellites. And they launch satellites, and after that, they destroy their own satellite and make lots of space debris also. You can see this graph, and that's really increasing the number of the space debris. So why not the European countries and the Japan and United States collaborating to protect of the peace and stability of the outer space issues. So we have lots of capabilities and chances for the future between collaborating with European Union, European countries, and also the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you. You came prepared. You got maps, you got charts, you got graphs. We have a Zoom question now, so we will go to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beatrice. I'm from Australia as part of the Global Voices program. First of all, thank you for such an informative discussion that we're having today. My question is, you've mentioned communities of democracies, and it's been mentioned a couple of times during this week. My question is, would the community of democracy survive another administration such as Trump, given the recent rise in populism that we've seen?
I am going to go to my fellow American to take Beatrice's excellent question. Tori.
Thank you, Beatrice. It's a great question. I mean, if you asked President Biden, I think he would say that he ran on the very notion that American democracy was fledgling and that it wouldn't survive a second term of the Trump administration. But I think there's a broader point to be addressed here in your question, Beatrice, and that's that democracies are challenged from within and from without. I think during the Trump administration, there was this focus on resurgent authoritarianism around the world and looking at challenges from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea as kind of an axis of authoritarian powers. But there was no recognition, maybe for cynical reasons, about declining democracy from within. And I think that notion has been flipped on its head in this new administration. We recognize that we have significant weaknesses within our own democracy, not just in the United States, but in our alliances and partnerships around the world, and that we have to strengthen our democratic resilience in order to speak with a collective voice abroad. We have this summit for democracy taking place ostensibly in the next year or so at some point in 2022. I think that there are going to be a lot of issues addressed there. First and foremost, who goes? How do we count democracies as democracies? I'm glad I'm not planning that, because I think that would be a difficult issue to address. But I do think, just to go back to your question, that there is a recognition that our democracies have been weakened from within by forces of populism, nationalism, and that we need to recognize these internal weaknesses in order to compete with authoritarian powers abroad. I think that's two sides of the coin that really need to be addressed if we're going to compete successfully with authoritarian powers, whether that be Russia, China, or others.
Thank you so much. Yes, we will see who is at the summit, and if as Bruno suggested, at some point, the United States gets more flexible as to who's allowed in its democratic club. Very quickly, we have just a few minutes left, but very quickly, I'd like to put this question to the Europeans. Do you think that this sort of pro-democratic, transatlantic stance against China and Russia and great power, and our great power universe, right? We've learned that it's not just the world, it's also in space. Does that survive if Trump or someone like Trump is back in 2024? Very quickly.
Can I disagree with the question?
Of course, yeah.
Because I think that's not really the main question. For me, the main question is the rise of China in particular and the way it's affecting the global system. What we saw in the last 2-3 years was a kind of failure of enforcing global norms on a scale that we hadn't seen before. So remember when the Hong Kong protests started, the sort of educated opinion in Western media and commentariat was, there is no way that China can respond to this. It lost control over Hong Kong. And that's kind of the reaction we had 20, 30 years ago, that an authoritarian state could not react to such widespread protests. Because, the solution was to bring the military in,
right,
and that would have unintended consequences. Well, I think, we've been learning that things are a bit more complicated, and that this power of enforcement coming from global democracies is much weakened. China was able to control the dissent in Hong Kong. We see in Belarus even more shocking that a small country like Belarus was able to put an end to the protests. And so really for me, the question, and I'm sorry to say this, it might not sound popular, is actually a question of power distribution and the way we have to marshal new sources of power, find new allies if we want to have a stable global balance of power. Because what's happening, it seems clear to me, is that countries like China and like Russia are testing the limits and becoming increasingly confident that there are no consequences to a number of actions. Navalny is another great example. So every month or every couple of months, we see how this global order is eroding further and further.
Well, on that optimistic note, let's just very quickly check in with our poll results. Producers, can we see the poll? There we go. No, that's I need to hit poll. We have, the question was, what percentage of Central and Eastern Europeans is worried about China's rising economic power? 47%, no, it's roughly 50-50, right? I think, if I'm reading that right. Anyway, in just a second, we will continue in this very room with a session called Political Leadership and Climate Change. United we stand. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back after a short video. But first, please join me in thanking Tori, Kinga, Bruno, Minister Nakayama. Thank you all so much for being here today. We hope you enjoyed Great Power Competition.